Good evening, dear friends. Welcome back to our Eden Convocation 2021 events. Tonight we are gathered in a forum around our common theme. This is what theology looks like: public ministries of resilience and solidarity, a celebration of Eden Theological Seminary in and with the progressive Christian movement. Tonight we are led by the practical, progressive theological vision of none other than Reverend Tracy Blackman, reflecting with me on 4 brilliant examples of congregational and community partnerships. The forum is entitled Launching into Solidarity, Community Partnerships, and Congregational Purpose. This forum tonight is our Camp lecture for our spring convocation. And the Camp Endowment supports the sharing of scholarship at the intersection of theology and the life of the church. And who better to lead us in such work in these days than Reverend Tracy Blackman, who from her national platform as an Associate General Minister of the United Church of Christ, along with her years of pastoral ministry experience, has developed an insight into the purpose of congregations. And she articulates that around the metaphor of a launching pad. The congregation is a launching pad for members of the church to be launched, to join the life of God in the community, in the world. She also reflects on this around the metaphor of the church gathered in tension with the church scattered. Our dear Eden alumni colleague, Reverend Tracy Blackman, both with an MDiv degree from Eden Seminary and an honorary Doctor of Divinity, will engage with me in a conversation about these community partnerships, celebrating how they each, in different and intriguing ways, give evidence to how the form of the congregation is not so much fading away as it is moving. It is moving with the Spirit. So get ready to dig into this feast of practical ecclesiological vision and practice. And as we do so, we are so powerfully joined in these 4 examples by wonderful leaders throughout the community in St. Louis, community partnerships with congregations that are just inspiring in their scope and in the connection and service and transformation they are offering the communities they serve. We will hear from the potbangers with Dr. Kathy Daniels of Eden Seminary. She is the head of the Potbangers organization, the president, the executive director, and the one who conceived of it. It is her brainchild. And she will be joined with members of congregations both in Ferguson, St. Peter's, United Church of Christ, and First Congregational United Church of Christ of St. Louis. We'll also feature a conversation on faith and for the sake of all, a powerful organization working in community health in St. Louis, with Reverend Gabrielle Kennedy, the executive director of that organization, and other members who are also interacting from the congregational side as well as within the public health side. We will hear about Freedom Schools, a wonderful model in educational community partnership with the Children's Defense Fund, and locally here hosted by the Deaconess Foundation, and two congregations, St. John's United Church of Christ in the city of St. Louis, and Peace United Church of Christ in Webster Groves. And the Eden Garden and Gleaning Project, a wonderful community partnership between congregations in Vincennes, Indiana, rural Indiana, in farming communities, and congregations here in the St. Louis area, suburban and urban, working on food insecurity, getting resources to people, gleaning from fields in Indiana and sharing that abundance with communities here in St. Louis and organizations in congregations that are reaching out into communities and connecting with the pain and suffering, real pain and suffering heard in communities and responding. And so in each of these conversations, Reverend Blackman brings her insight and really sees the power of the congregation in community partnership, responding to communities and finding its vitality in these partnerships. So you are invited to join the conversation through the chat, share your insights, what you're hearing, how that might connect with your context. We really want to hear from you. When the forum is over, I'll be back with a brief recap, and we will record this and it will be available on YouTube and on the seminary's website. So now enjoy on Facebook. Please leave your comments as well. And those in Zoom and Facebook, sit back and enjoy the conversation.
It is in the streets that the church was born and not in the upper room, right? And there's just so many lessons in that people heard in their own language, and whether that means that they were speaking in different languages or whether that means that somehow the message got through. It says so much about the responsibility of those who are filled to speak in languages that people understand. And it says so much about the fact that the church was never meant to be a place to congregate. It's not to, the purpose is not to congregate, the purpose is to compel, right? And so I feel that the church at its best is simply a launching pad, somewhere where you receive fuel to go out, um, somewhere where maybe you occasionally rest, but the work is not in the upper room, right? The miracles are not in the upper room. Um, the transformation is not in the upper room; it's in the streets.
That's what I'm really excited about. These four conversations, these four vignettes of that I think are perfect examples of congregations figuring that out
Hmm.
in partnership with community organizations.
Hmm.
And so they are examples, I think, of that launching pad in action.
So much of the time, we're talking about what a post-COVID reality is going to look like. And I just saw a study that just came out this week that for the first time, the number of people who don't attend church, who don't claim any institution, is greater than the number of people who do. And I don't doubt that, but I'm not afraid of it. And I don't think I actually believe the gospel that I preach, and I don't believe that the church is ever going to go away, right? Um, I'm experiencing it as a return. There are a few things that I say I want to return to, right? I don't like the word going back to normal because we never were in normal in the first place. But when I look at the church as it was intended in the scripture, I think this is a wonderful opportunity for the church to rediscover its roots, right? So, what if this compelled us not to lament about the changing demographics of the church and the changing size of the church? What if we embraced it as an opportunity to redefine the church and to reimagine the church, right? I'll probably get in a lot of trouble for saying this, but it's my trouble, so I can get in it. I don't think the church was ever meant to be mega. I don't think the church was ever meant to be monstrous. I think the church, in its best, is a church that can care for the people that are in that community, right? And care can happen in a lot of ways, and I'm certainly not suggesting that people who have large churches don't care for people. I'm not suggesting that, but there is something about building community with people that you know, other than just on worship Sundays or other than just on Bible study, but that you really know their lives, right? And so it's an opportunity for smaller gatherings to become more church. And it's an opportunity to not define church simply by the building that holds the community. That's one piece. Another piece is I've been doing a lot of thinking and a little writing about this concept of church gathered versus church scattered. And I was really challenged this way on a trip to the UK. And I was with some Presbyterians who were doing some work in the UK around re envisioning church for the people who attend church, to take the focus off um, of empirical data that says you're doing a good job because your pews are filled and you're doing a good job because you have money in the bank, to actually looking at contact, right? So how does that play out in our our current construct of church? Here's the thing: what if the pulpit or you know ordained ministry is not the be all and end all of church? What if what everyone is called to do is a holy ministry? And what if the church treated it like that? We say that, we know that, right? Priesthood of all believers. But what if we re envisioned, reimagined ourselves in a way that we really lived into that? So if someone, in my traditions at least, if someone says they want to be a minister, people, celebrate that. They're all excited about that. Some people help you get through seminary. All of that is wonderful. All of that is necessary. Seminary is necessary. Let me say that, Madam President. Seminary is necessary, because that is the call of some people, right? And the people who have that call need to be equipped for that call. But teaching outside of seminary is also a call. Being a bus driver is a call.
Amen.
Right? Um, being a nurse is a call.
Of course.
What if churches entertain the idea of, instead of elevating one type of ministry, commissioning all ministries, right? So if we're talking about touch point, must touch point be measured by those who come inside? Or can we move from church gathered measurements to church scattered measurements? If we actively discipled the people who were in our church, right?
Mm-hmm.
The person who works in the school cafeteria is going to see more people than I'm going to see in the pulpit, right?
Amen.
The teacher who's teaching in a high school may see more people.
And I think, speaking of like the movement as it started, I think Paul's movement
Yes.
understood church that way.
Yes.
His network with business people and tradespeople, and how in Rome or in different contexts, in urban contexts around the Mediterranean,
Yes.
house churches interacted with people who were going about their everyday lives. And the assembly was all of that. It wasn't just the people gathered, for worship.
That's what I really enjoyed about the stories that you curated for this piece, because I could actually see the launching of all of them. And all of them were, in my opinion, launched out of some need, right?
Yeah.
Some need in the greater community, that in most cases, there, one person wasn't afraid to try.
Thinking of Mama Cat. Mama Cat's an instigator who inspired others, and that catalyzed, people keep using that word in that conversation, that catalyzed, that changed the imagination of those two congregations about why they exist.
The Ministry of Potbangers, which is a 501c3 committed to the care and service of the people of the community, particularly unhoused people, both through direct service and preparing and sharing of meals and items for comfort and safety on the streets, along with advocacy and stirring up pots, both actually to create meals and stirring the pot of our elected officials and others who often turn a cold heart toward our unhoused family. And so being an organization that lives out that mission in the community. And that organization is the brainchild of none other than Kathy Daniels, known by everyone as Mama Cat, and known by those of us at Eden Seminary as Dr. Daniels or Dr. Cat, because she is a recipient of an honorary degree for her vision in founding this organization and her leadership in the community. And so we are joined by Dr. Daniels here with us, and we are delighted with that. And we are joined by pastors and members of two congregations that have collaborated with Pot Bangers over the past several years. I'm Deb Kraus, the president of Eden Seminary, and I am going to begin this conversation with a question to you, Mama Cat. So how did that work that began in the streets of Ferguson find its way into a collaboration with congregations? Would love to hear you reflect on that.
Wow. So, you know, when Michael Brown was killed, I was just out there trying to help where I can, didn't know where my place was. I was at the time a student at Culinary Institute of St. Louis, you know, working on a culinary degree, and went out there and met the Lost Voices. And, you know, when I asked them, how can I help them? They said, look, a hot meal won't hurt nothing. And that's when I first came with the meal. I could have dropped it off and kept going. But the important thing is sitting down, breaking bread. When you break bread, you break down walls. And so I shared the meal with these young folks on that day. And from that day forward, every day I got out of school and went and sat with those young folks. And I didn't just eat with them, but I listened and they listened to me. And, you know, that's when you start breaking those walls down. Before Michael Brown was killed, I'm not going to name the church, but I was a member of a church. And when this happened, this particular church didn't really appreciate us being out in the streets. And so I knew that I couldn't stay there because my place is here. And, you know, I was willing to go and still willing to go to whatever, you know, in the name of justice, right? So I was out there and I was like, man, churches, you know, I started getting that mentality, you know, and I remember that one night when it was like a whole line of preachers came out there in front of the Ferguson Police Department. I thought that was the dopest thing in the world. And I'm like, I need to know them, you know, and I eventually did know them. And I knew y'all. And when Antonio Martin was killed by Berkeley police, this is where that connection first really started happening. That night, that's the night that things happened with Josh that landed him where he at right now. And, you know, it was so much trauma that was going on. And mom was out there and they had her standing there like not far from where her child is laying under the sheet dead, where they done killed her child, but they standing there making her stand there and talk to them. I just couldn't like not go, you know, when I had an opportunity and talk to her. And I discovered something that she not only didn't know how she gonna pay her rent, but how she gonna bury her son. And what is she gonna do? How's she gonna make it through? You know, and I remember we did a fundraiser to help pay for their funeral. And by that time, you know, I was getting to know Reverend Sekou and Pastor Anita and Reverend Tracy and yourself, and it was organic. And, you know, and they would always say in the movement during the uprising, okay, well, we got Lost Voices over here, we got this group over here, we got Hands Up, we got this one, that one. And then we got the clergy, and Mama Cat go with the clergy. So I'm just thankful because for a while, I was like, where's the church at? But the church came to the street, and that was the dopest thing that ever happened.
Wow.
And so, yeah, that's how that happened. And, you know, I'm thankful because, you know, we had our Christmas party, the first movement Christmas party. I don't know where I get this bright idea with me and Donna. I don't know what we was thinking about, but we was able to bring every organization in this movement into First Congregational, United Church of Christ, on Wide Down, and the whole movement was in that room. And it was a beautiful thing. Then the winter of 2017, that was the most horrible winter I can remember in St. Louis. And I knew the temperatures was going to drop. And you know, when people say, call me, I'm going to call you. And Elliot Davis told me to call him. So I called him, because what you need to see is the city's not doing their job. People are dying out here. Mr. Grover Perry died in a porta potty. I mean, someone died in a dumpster. It was all of that going on. So now the mayor need to be put on spotlight because they're not doing their job. So it brought a lot of people out. So in this season right now, I feel good that it's so many people that's out there now on the streets, because we put out a call a couple of years ago and the people answered and they still there.
Patrick and Josh, I'm going to start with you all as pastors. What are the connections there that you see to ministry?
We wanted to do something here at St. Peter's regarding unhoused here in Ferguson. And because of Mama Cat's ministry and her witness. And we sat down in the library, me and Josh and Mama Cat and a couple of others, and had kind of that first conversation. And that was the first, and it eventually turned into the Ferguson Warming and part of the Ferguson Warming Center. Now, when we, at least when I, especially during this COVID year, when we think about our ministry and our witness, it is very much centered around our relationship with pot bangers and with the unhoused. The relationship with pot bangers, the work that we have done on whether it's hosting her and her work, whether it's the Warming Center, has helped us shift in a huge conversation from just being a mission-centered faith community to being justice-centered. Things that were difficult conversations 2.5 years ago are things that are taken for granted now. And I mean that in a positive way. It's just assumed now that this is who we are.
Mama Cat's concept of breaking bread, which has, I think, in good ways infiltrated St. Peter's in ways maybe we didn't know was there until we reflect back. So I can think about numerous church members, either longstanding members or newer members, who just through having Mama Cat and Pot Bangers and Warming Center in the building would develop relationships, hear conversations, and then say, oh, that's interesting. Can I be a part of that? Or, oh, you know what? I think I actually have some clothes at home that I could bring. Or, you know, I do have a leftover blanket. Do you ever need that? Like stuff like that, that seem trivial and trite in the moment because it's just like, okay, yeah, sure, we can take a blanket. Yeah, sure, we need coats, right? I add to mushroom, to use Patrick's word, to mushroom into something bigger. That just adds to the mission and the justice work and the equity work that is happening.
I first was involved with pot bangers before becoming a part of the church community. And kind of similar, I guess, to Mama Cat, I wasn't used to seeing the church in the streets doing the justice seeking work. But in Ferguson, it was different because clergy did start showing up, and there was a chant that we would say at the end of actions that was, "It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains." And I really believe that. You know, being in the streets, I started hearing things like, well, I'm praying with my feet. It's action, and it's being a part of the community. The pastors talk about in his sermons, talking about the Spirit agitating, advocating, holding us accountable. That's what being in the street's about. That's what taking care of each other is about. Taking food downtown with Mama Cat.
Reverend White, in coming into your position at First Congregational, how have you thought of this?
When I looked at FCC's profile, that was one of the reasons I was very interested in applying for the senior minister position. When you think about, for me, what comes to mind, go out and make disciples. Too often the church gets that confused and thinks that means membership, maintaining membership. And for me, the key word in there is go out. Meet people where people are at. To hear Mama Cat say she prepared meals and she sat with people and she ate with people, she listened. For me, that speaks the volumes of the kind of ministry that we all should be doing, especially today. This is how you build community. This is how you dismantle all the isms in the community, becoming one with the community. And most of all, listening to people, learning people's names, reading the profile and seeing that they were in partnership with Mama Cat and the Pop Bangers, for me that's energy. That's real good. That's godly energy.
Paul and Claire Brady, members of Pop Bangers and members of First Congregational St. Louis.
We knew that something was going on in the kitchen, and I was a member of the Mission and Outreach Committee, and we weren't sure who Mama Cat was, and we have a lot of different organizations that we are connected to. And one of my jobs was to find out more about Mama Cat and Pop Bangers, so I started coming down on a Thursday to see what it was about. And Mama Cat was just so welcoming, and there was always something different going on every week, and it was just it was an absolutely amazing experience.
Through the work that Claire was doing, and we were bridging between ministers. So even though in our strategic vision, we had a goal to, for justice, being a beacon of light for justice in St. Louis, I think we both came to the conclusion that the work that Mama Cat was doing, and once you get to know Mama Cat and Perez and the rest of the family, you naturally fall in love not only with the mission but with the people. We started then to invest in the kitchen. I think we have a role to play to support Mama Cat, but I think there's another role that we can that should evolve here. And as Patrick and Josh said, this should be the catalyst to take our congregation from the pews to actually prayer by walking and being involved and participating in conversations. Because, being an Englishman, I'm a little bit satirical and sarcastic on people being do-gooders. And I think the best thing to do to be a do-gooder is to go and do it. Thank you, Mama Cat, for helping us.
Y'all just got me sitting over here blushing all kinds of ways, all that positive energy. And that's just what we wanted to create, is a space where, we say the revolution, talk about revolution. The revolution is love, and love always wins. We have this transitional house that will serve women, straight, cisgender, queer, and transgender women. Because of relationships with the church, we'll be able to keep on lifting up people, showing them that you don't have to stay where you are. I mean, I can always go out there, I love to cook a good meal and go and break bread with the unhoused fam, but at the same time, I don't want to be always calling them my unhoused fam. I want to be able to go and support my fam that got off the street that's in their own place, And so that's what this transitional house is, just the start. And y'all got to come by and see it. It is amazing. Together, we can take those mountains and say, move. I think so. But I thank you all because, none of us is as good as all of us.
I told a story about Mama Cat today in this class I was lecturing for, and people literally started to cry. I told this story, I don't know if you were there, but there was this night across from the police station, and people were all in the parking lot across from the police station as people meandered and taking turns going out and standing in front of the police, the whole thing. And Mama Cat and Perez showed up in their truck, right? And Mama Cat and Perez and people who were out there who started going over to help pulled out these long church tables, and they set them up, and she began to put serving dishes, chafing dishes, and she brought out this food. And when it was all set up, she took the megaphone and said, y'all come get something to eat. And it's a megaphone. So law enforcement could hear it. Of course, they didn't come. But my point is the invitation was over a megaphone.
Just to everybody.
And people started coming and lining up and grabbing something to eat.
Hmm.
And I was watching, I still get chills about it. I saw communion. And to today, it is still the most sacred communion I've ever seen. And when I think about all the people, we like to say young people, but young and old, who no longer find identity in the institution of church, but who find community in the streets. And for me in that moment, it was God reminding me that church is where the people's cries are heard and the community responds. And that night, that was in the parking lot.
Yeah. Breaking bread. I mean, the origin story of Pot Bangers, of Mama Cat's connection in the movement, involves breaking bread with lost voices.
Yes.
And she, in that conversation, she says, I guess I could have just dropped off the food and left, but you got to break bread.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a real Jesus thing.
Yeah.
And it's an activation of that sharing and the acknowledgement of the sacred space of communing with another.
Mm-hmm.
There's some people who know that. She is a teacher of that,
Mm-hmm.
and in some ways a reminder of that for these two churches.
Mm-hmm. And what a beautiful way to offer a place for people to belong. Right? That's what she does.
Mm-hmm.
They provide space, but she offers a place for people to belong. And it's a place that doesn't require them to be anybody but who they are.
Right.
And that's a beautiful thing.
Reverend Chandler at Ferguson, St. Peter Ferguson, talks about the church because of their association with the community partnership of pot bangers around engaging with unhoused folks in Ferguson. Says, we've shifted from being a mission-centered church to a justice-seeking church. That work, centering the work of what is the ministry of St. Peter UCC in Ferguson around being community and a place of belonging for unhoused people, has completely changed. And Nicole talks about how it's changed preaching, and it's changed, it's changed the way the pastors preach and what happens in worship.
Well, transformation only happens in relationship, right? So their relationships changed. And when relationship changes, people are transformed. It's not surprising to me at First Con, at St. Peter, at any church, that having relationships with people that allows you to see more commonality than difference, that allows you to actually see that there is very little space between who I am and who this person is.
Right.
Transformation happens that way. Freedom School has a pretty significant cost to it. And Deaconess, as an entity, um, supplemented that cost for churches to begin this journey, right? And so sometimes the catalyst for change is also found in accompaniment, right? So because Deaconess accompanied churches, which made doing Freedom School within reach, accompanied in many ways, not just financially, right? But taking on the task of um, creating a system that reached out to colleges and got teachers that could be trained and put them in freedom schools and made sure that every church had representatives that were trained and who were involved in freedom school. There are multiple relationships that happen um, off of this launching pad if someone has the guts and the courage to say, let's go, right?
Right.
And in this particular case, it was Starsky. It was Starsky's vision of making an impact with Deaconess that was different than the impacts that we had made before.
As Deaconess was going through that shift
Mhm.
into more of an outward facing, as you say, posture in its work, he was accompanying congregations to make that shift as well. Welcome to this forum highlighting the community partnerships between the Deaconess Center for Child Wellbeing in collaboration with the Children's Defense Funds, Freedom Schools, with congregations in the St. Louis area, namely in this setting, Peace United Church of Christ and St. John's the Beloved Community United Church of Christ.
The relationship between Deaconess Foundation and the Children's Defense Fund really began prior to us first having a Freedom Schools here in St. Louis in 2017. So under the great leadership of Reverend Dr. Starsky Wilson, Deaconess really identified some strategies and priorities around child advocacy in 2014. And one of those priorities was to cultivate congregations here in the St. Louis area for advocacy. Thought that it would be a unique opportunity to deeply engage congregations in our UCC conferences here in actually serving children for many weeks during the summer, and to also equip those volunteers with the tools to advocate for children and their well-being well beyond the 7-week program. So the Children's Defense Fund is the nation's largest child advocacy organization. And the Freedom Schools program is one of the many initiatives that CDF created and that they continue to sponsor nationwide. The 7-week program provides summer enrichment, and it centers around 5 essential components. So it's high quality academic engagement and enrichment, parent and family involvement, civic engagement and social action, intergenerational leadership development, and nutritional, physical, and mental health. And so the enrichment, though it's centered in the foundation or all of those 5 components, it's really rooted in an integrated reading curriculum to provide children in grades that we serve, kindergarten through 5, with those literary skills that will help to curb the summer learning loss. And what we say, close opportunity gaps. They are led by young adult college students, folks who have this passion and excitement for serving and being social change agents. And they are the ones actually leading each and every day in implementing this curriculum. Also, a huge component of this is the parent and family engagement. We partner with grassroots organizing and mobilizing and advocacy organizations to make this work happen, so that we're engaging our parents and our families in the social justice movement, the racial justice movement.
Reverend Higgins and Reverend Bruner, I know that the context in which your churches, you're both UCC churches and you're in very different contexts. How the Project of Freedom Schools, in your experience, in your congregations, connects to your congregation's sense of mission and purpose.
Honored to be on a panel with some women of power and grace. It's always a pleasure to see the faces of real comrades in the struggle for liberation. I have had the glorious testimony of being connected to Freedom Schools in 3 ways, not only as brand new pastor of a church that hosts, but I was also connected through the parent and community engagement sessions as the co-founder and one of the lead organizers for Partnerships of Action St. Louis, which led a political activism and civic engagement session for Freedom Schools just a few years ago. And I was delighted to engage with parents as a trainer for those sessions and as a parent. The third and most important way I've engaged with Freedom Schools. I have 2 babies, Moses and Matilda, who can read when I tell you these children could read a college textbook. And the reason for that is CDF Freedom Schools. It is because I rolled up to St. John's, a church I had no idea I would ever be the pastor of at the time, those years ago. I pulled up to St. John's, a beloved community, like someone told me I need to stop by and put my children in a space where Black people are concerned about Black liberation, and we are doing it ourselves for ourselves. And so when I think about the context in which my babies were learning, the context in which I was invited to teach political activism, even when Action St. Louis pulled up at Peace to run a session on political activism and learning and understanding civic engagement in the city of St. Louis, we were welcomed through the lens of knowing that those who are furthest back in the field, psychologists call this vantage point wisdom, those who are the furthest removed from political power are the ones who have the highest and deepest wisdom on what impact any move will make for the liberation of everyone. And that is to literally say that if you are a trans Black woman, your freedom has direct impact on the liberation, understanding, equality, and therefore the actual abundant life of a white, cisgender, heterosexual man. And so when we think about our children who lack opportunities, if we focus on the ones who are most removed from political power, even our white brothers and sisters can show up, show that solidarity, take that risk, lose a little budget, hang out in the world of, the realm and spaces of learning more about Fannie Lou Hamer than you are about Marie Curie. And show up and realize that it actually sets you free into a further abundance. So I believe that St. John's Church is a place that has always refused to view our position, our human condition, as scarcity. The world looks at us, or a lot of people out there look at St. John's, they look at the corner of Grand and Lee and they say this is a location of scarcity. But actually, in truth, abundance lives in the Black church tradition. We are born from the abundance of believing the things that we can see, even though they are unseen. We are born from the abundance of believing in that which faith gives us the substance to actually call evidence of the stuff that hasn't shown up yet. And so for me, our beloved Black children who are blessed to be so are the evidence of things unseen. They are the substance of everything that we hope for. And as a mother to 2 of those babies that are evidence, as an organizer who is able to show from the Black liberation struggle history all the way into the Afrofuture, that St. Louis is the epicenter of evidence of things unseen. I believe that a congregation just like St. John's is really, really ready, not only prepared, but ready to even go further and to adjust and to do whatever we need to do to connect through such I think, constantly timeless, within and ahead of their time initiative like CDF Freedom Schools, because they treat children as if they are who they have the potential to be.
Amen.
James Baldwin said, "Your crown has been bought and paid for." And CDF Freedom Schools treats babies like they are growing up into the crown that's being held over their heads.
Amen.
I'm triple blessed to be involved in this organization.
Thank you so much, Reverend Higgins. And Reverend Bruner, what evidence of things unseen are you seeing at Peace through this collaboration?
Really has everything to do with my relationship with Reverend Dr. Starsky Wilson. There's an opportunity here to transform lives, right? That's the bottom line. And transform the lives of young children, scholars, transform the lives of young college age students, and transform the life of your congregation. And he was right, of course, on every count. And so, first of all, I would just say about Webster Groves, there is a part of Webster Groves that many people have forgotten, has been marginalized by the community in many ways. And so this was an opportunity for us to reach out to some of the young children and their families who didn't have opportunities that many people in Webster Groves would have. And so that was one of the things that we thought we could do. But I think the other piece, and what you probably really want me to talk about, is this transformation of the congregation, right? And it truly has, right? So there's a couple of ways. People thought it was a great idea, right? Oh yes, let's do that. And so there was a lot of work and intent in making it happen, but nobody was prepared for what happened when the first year, 25 little scholars ran through the doors of our church. And the relationships that were built between the congregation and the scholars, because we saw them all the time. We were serving breakfast and lunch. People were there all the time. And, you know, one of the women is all of a sudden grandma to some of the scholars, and just this amazing relationship building with the children, the scholars, and their families. Really, really something else, so that when the next year happened, it was like coming home. It was reunion. It was all of that kind of stuff. But here's the other piece. So not only was it just this amazing way to build relationships, but what happens when those relationships are built, right? Now, all of a sudden, right, we understand clearly that there are children who are being left out in many ways in our society. And things like Medicaid expansion then becomes not just some kind of intellectual exercise, it becomes this real thing, right? That the children that we know and love, how are the children, right? That's another thing Tracy Blackman always asks, right? How are the children? We know that those children that we claim now as part of our family too, could use healthcare, right? Like, and so those kinds of initiatives start happening. We become far more engaged in grassroots organizing, Medicaid expansion, livable wage, right? We're on the street, we're petitioning, we're gathering signatures. All of that work is happening. Why? Because we have connections that are real. And then when we have something happen, like George Floyd is killed, right, by a police officer, the first thing that happens is one of the people from the congregation I serve comes to me and says, "Wendy, we have to do something here. Can we stand vigil on the street of Webster, on the main street of Webster Groves?" And by the end of the day, we had 25 people standing vigil every Friday night from that day on until now, and we continue to do that. Even when racial slurs were placed on our sidewalk, and the city said, "Oh, this is so not who we are." And my response then to the mayor can be, "I think it is exactly who we are, and we need to address that." So it's an opening. And then, of course, it becomes even the stronger will of the people of this congregation to change structural and systemic racism, because we realize that we're all connected and that we also suffer. Anyway, isn't that something? What 25 scholars can do.
The roots of CDF Freedom Schools, to Wendy's point, you know, the curriculum for Freedom Schools is rooted in the civil rights movement, right? So the origins of CDF Freedom Schools comes from Charles Cobb, a UCC college student. And it's rooted in the Freedom Summer of 1964. And so there were college students coming from all over the country to Mississippi to be a part of this movement to secure justice and voting rights for Black citizens, which is amazing because what's the topic of conversations related to voting rights right now in 2021? And this was in 1964. Okay, so the work there's always work to be done. So those are maybe even the early roots of parental and family engagement, welcoming all into the fold. But I needed to bring that history to the forefront, especially and in particularly because of where we are now in March of 2021 relating to voting rights.
I wanted to thank you all so much for this really full and brilliant pastoral theological reflection on the congregations you serve and the ways in which Freedom School is bringing the work and life of God into the congregation and inviting the congregation out into the community, into the work and life of God. It's really been a powerful example of that. Children coming into the church, the 25 young scholars, how that transformed her community. And what it really seems as though it's around this idea of relationship, because the members of the church got to know these children and got to know their families. And therefore, Wendy describes we're now much more engaged in policy around how racial ethnic minorities and poor people are impacted. All kinds of policy things now are personal.
There is an ethos at St. John that prepared them for Freedom School. Freedom School was a natural progression. What I think Michelle represents is the next iteration of that. And I think she will be absolutely phenomenal and already is phenomenal in that. And for her, it will be very much about us helping ourselves. Blackness was revered.
Yes. You will grow into your crown.
You will grow into, I loved that imagery, right? And Michelle will bring with her additional pieces of that. In that particular story, that Karen had to be paying attention, that she had to really be seeing people in two different locations, but also in two different worlds, right? And making a connection that was her call to make, right? So she acted kind of as a conduit between the supply and the need.
Yeah.
And that never goes just like this, it goes more like this, right? So it feeds both. The giver is richly and abundantly blessed in the giving away, and the receivers are richly and abundantly blessed in the receipt of that, right? And both of them see each other differently.
Right.
It is a contradiction to the notion that people who have don't care about people who have not. And it's a contradiction to the notion that people who have not don't care to have, right? And Karen, seeing both, made that possible.
Delighted to be here with the Garden and Gleaning Project, which is a collaboration between several communities, and to introduce the members of our congregation and representatives of those communities. I'm going to invite Reverend Dr. Kristen Leslie, who is our professor of pastoral care and theology at Eden Seminary, to introduce the folks who are with us on the call today.
I'm so pleased to be here with my friends and colleagues and with you. So let me introduce you. Karen Pettmeyer is a third-year student, soon to graduate from Eden. She's the brainchild behind the Eden Garden and Gleaning Project. She's the pastor at Cahokia United Church of Christ, and she's a member in discernment in the Indiana-Kentucky Conference of the UCC. Next, we have the Veeks, Jana and Lonnie Veek, who are members at St. John's UCC in Vincennes, and they are the folks who have opened their farms and opened their hearts to us to do the gleaning and have made the connections, have shared with us their great connections with family and friends there in Vincennes that would have allowed us to do the gleaning. And then there's Mrs. Pat Pendleton, who's the director of the Centennial Christian Church Food Ministry and Pantry here in St. Louis, who runs an amazing program to feed folks who are in great need. And just to be in her presence is exhausting because the level of energy is amazing. And I'm thrilled to work with all of these folks.
And to start us off, Karen, how do you see it as a collaboration between the church and communities?
The Garden and Gleaning Project started about 2 years ago. And I had been working with Dr. Leslie with Winter Outreach and also some food distribution in the area. And it made me think about the waste of food back at home in Indiana. Then I had lunch with Jana right after leaving school. And we got talking and she said, hey, how about the farmers? And she talked to Lonnie and Lonnie said, oh yes, this can be done. And it quickly bloomed. Our main goal here is the food is kind of it's a third item. It's something everybody needs food, but it's a way of connecting the communities so that, people from Eden go to the farms, meet the farmers and the kids at St. John's that are gleaning and the adults that are gleaning. And then also we get to meet Mrs. Pat and the people that are working with her in her food distribution program. And we get to make those connections as well. And it's been really interesting how those connections have formed and grown. And just this last winter, I got a call from Helping His Hands in Vincennes, which is a place where we drop off produce before we leave Knox County. And they asked if we needed gloves and thermal underwear shirts for winter outreach for the unhoused in St. Louis, because that's another aspect of their ministry. But just connecting those ministries has been a wonderful experience.
I think that's so wonderful. And the biblical phrase from the book of Esther, for such a time as this, working on relationships and connections between people in suburban and urban contexts and people in rural contexts. It's almost our patriotic duty right now, it seems to me, in the United States to really reach out beyond our context and connect with one another. And this seems like a really powerful way for churches and community-based organizations to do that. Ms. Pendleton, if I could ask you, Mrs. Pat, about your ministry at Centennial.
Well, we call our food ministry Hope Food Ministry. Our vision is a lighthouse for all who seek the Lord. And I think what has happened is our vision is coming to fruition. And our church has been that beacon of light for those in the community that hunger. And we've had a food pantry for about 19 years. However, we have been struggling. It has not been where we felt the Lord wanted it to be. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, about 1 year ago, my husband and I were sitting, and my heart was just so sad because of our children. They could not go to school, and in some instances, this was the only meal that they were getting. The only meals that they were getting were from the school, and so it's like we just got to do something. And so I said, well, what we can do is we can serve lunches, we can serve sandwiches. One day I had another brainstorm, and it's like, for what we're paying for sandwiches, we could really do a hot meal. And so then we started doing hot meals. That was the beginning of Lighthouse Lunches. Over the last year, we have served almost 7,800 meals, hot meals. Then we moved from there. It's like, well, you know what? There are a lot of people on the streets who can't get here. And so we created these neighbors keeper boxes. We take the box and we go to where the need is. Then we said, well, you know what? The pantry does every second and fourth Saturday. And our pantry has just been blessed, just in full bloom. And so it's like, well, maybe we'll feed those who come to the pantry. So then we have Oh Taste and See. This lady came with this humongous bag of corn. The Gardening Gleaning Project has, you know, our guests like corn. And so we don't always have the corn, the fresh corn. As a matter of fact, we never had fresh corn. And so Karen has blessed us with corn, pumpkin, squash, potatoes, and the biggest squash that I've ever seen in my life. We can truly say, when I was hungry, you fed me. And so we are growing. My little mind continues to work, and I'm saying, okay, now what else can we do? So people will say to my husband and I, how do you guys keep doing this? Because why would I not? As a church, God continues to bless us to do that. So we are a true lighthouse for all who seek the Lord.
Is such a profound sharing of your ministries. What do you think about this gleaning project? I mean, how has it struck you in terms of, I've heard the phrase food waste. You've obviously seen this for a long time. And so what does it mean for it to be activated and made provision for feeding people?
Well, I think I have to say Karen was the one that brought this up. It's always been there, but you have to have somebody to make the spark, come up with the idea. Jan and I have been raised on the farm, and we kind of knew this, but now I've already talked to one of the farmers today. They're ready.
You have blessed us with the opportunity to give and to be a part of this, where we knew that there were people in need in places, and we knew this was going to waste, but getting that connection is what we really needed. And I think it's just really been a blessing for us and for the farmers there. As you can hear, they're excited about this, and they don't like to see their crops go to waste. It's not, it becomes not feasible for them to hire people to come in that last time and glean that last bit. They lose money on that. But if they can provide that to people, we've never had anyone say no. They've always, well, how can I help? And do you need the tractor? Do you need the wagon? What can we get for you? And what do you need? So it's just really been exciting and a great community project on this end. And then to connect with and to hear Miss Pat talk about, what she's doing there is so exciting and just really provides an energy. But all the people that come from Eden in the community. And when they come here and we have an opportunity to share our different experiences, we have people, coming that have never been on a farm, and then we've never been to some of these urban areas. And so it's been a great way to connect.
To have fresh vegetables is so important to the people in the community. We put the corn out, the zucchini, and what we had to do with some is like prepare some things and then say, this is what it tastes like. This is how you can do it. Other items, vegetable items that people really don't know what to do with, never had it before, then we are going to start preparing a dish and then with that item, and then put it out for them to taste. We do an additional thought about the educational piece of this. What is it what else can we do to help people survive in the midst of this madness? We're wandering in a wilderness, but we have to wander with a purpose.
Like you said, we're wandering in the wilderness, but we're wandering together and we're finding our way together.
Yes, we're separated physically, but we are together.
Yes.
Doing the work, doing the Lord's work.
Leslie, Kristen, as a practical theologian, as a professor of pastoral theology and care, what does this have you thinking about congregational ministry, partnerships, collaboration?
My favorite theologian is Letty Russell, and she talks about partnering in the mending of creation. And this is such a beautiful partnership of needs and resources on both ends. And the wonderful work of Karen Pettmeyer in listening to both and bringing people together has been just astounding. And at every spot along the way, it's just brought such great joy, which is, as I'm hearing from everybody talking, kind of a constant confirmation that we're doing the right work. One of the things that we early were committed to was to make sure to do some educational pieces around food insecurities, about food waste, and about the generosity of communities that may lack one little piece of information in order to know how to connect. I'm mindful that throughout the summer, when we knew that the Veeks were opening up their farms for us to come gleaning, Karen and I would get on the phone and make calls to Mrs. Pat and to several different ministries in St. Louis to see how much food could they take. And that was what determined how much we brought back, because we knew the generosity of the Veeks and others could send as much as we could take. And so we were just limited by our ability to bring it back.
I just want to serve. And so this was an opportunity, and the church has taken advantage of it, and it has just been beautiful, just awesome.
Thinking about how these networks and connections get built, that it really does require somebody having a curiosity and a sense of, could this happen? Karen was actively engaged with Kristen Leslie and Winter Outreach. She comes here as a student from rural Indiana, and she gets connected to the work of caring for unhoused people in the city of St. Louis in the cold weather. And I think that may have activated her seeing and attention in some important ways.
It also took Kristen Leslie for having a broader sense of pastoral care than just the institutionalized sense of pastoral care.
She's launched pastoral care into the community. Faith and for the Sake of All conversation seems like a great conversation to wrap up with, because each of the people in that conversation, I think, illustrate the sort of power of this launching pad project. And, starting with Dr. Purnell's zip code study of these horrific health disparities in St. Louis by zip code. And creating this through, I think, a variety of grants that different churches developed and leaders developed to say, okay, what's the faith community going to have to say about this? And that really created Faith and for the Sake of All. I am delighted to welcome Reverend Gabrielle Kennedy, who is going to lead us in this conversation about how the organization Faith and for the Sake of All is collaborating with congregations to open up the resources of congregations and connect congregations to the communities around them around the subject of public health.
Thank you so much, President Cross. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here with everyone to talk about the congregation as a launching pad. And this is such important work that it really is the focus of what Faith and for the Sake of All does here in the St. Louis region, as we are committed to improving the health and well-being of African Americans by mobilizing the faithful. And the boiled down version of the faithful is the fellowship of congregation, faith communities, and moral communities who are concerned about their neighbors. And so I invited with me today a few friends to help us have this discussion. You know, one of the things that we certainly believe is we believe in the importance, right, of the congregation as a place to enter into the community. And one of the things that we're beginning to do is we're beginning to expand out of that just a little bit and redefine what it means to be in a community of faith. And so certainly it means all the traditional things that we know, right? It means pews and pulpits, and it means Sunday morning for most of us, although this is an ecumenical experience, what it means to be church. Amen. It means that we do things in a non-traditional way, and sometimes it's not on Sunday morning. Sometimes it's on Monday morning.
I'm a product of a church doing outreach. I was in a family that was not very churched, as you would say. I was not, someone who was going to church every Sunday, that kind of, and the church that I became a part of, outreach, they had a strong ministry for young people, a young person, a person that was brought up very low income, inner city, single mother. The church saved my life, so that's really what I guide with. Okay. So wherever I am, and so I understand the importance of the church in education and connecting people, and then relationships, right? Because it's those relationships that allowed someone in the church to decide to outreach. And then when I got there, it was those relationships that allowed people in the congregation to want to embrace me and want to embrace me without parents. Like, I was a young person coming to church without family, and yet I was embraced. I was loved. I was loved as Jesus would love me. When I was a social worker and I would go out and meet with families who were in crises, I would always want to know, like, are they connected to a church? What churches are close by? If I had a wish list, it would be that back then when I was working, that I could pick up a phone and call up a minister or a church and say, okay, they just need food today. Okay. They don't necessarily need to be connected to, no one needs to come and get their kids, but they need services today that I know the church can give, because I have experienced the power of the church. So I'm always thinking about that. And even, in corporate America, they understand. A lot of times the church doesn't always understand how powerful, we are. They understand community and connecting, and they're like, what about faith communities? What about this?
It was an experience with that Tina and I went through together, that it began to be highlighted for us that that the needs in Black communities that we saw it first in the church, because the church as the anchor, right, for many communities, they're folks, when they are at their lowest, they go to the church, right? And so we were trying to funnel resources through churches, but the churches, they weren't ready. They did not have resources to be able to process. They didn't have the capacity, rather, to be able to process the resources that we were trying to bring to the church. And so that's what made it become pretty important to us to say, how then do we increase that capacity so that when the resources show up, Black churches specifically will be able to take advantage of those. There are some churches that were able to process those resources. And when I think about that, I think of Pastor Renee Johnson. In the midst of watching people die and watching them die disproportionately because of the effects of the morbidity rates, the hospitalization rates, contraction rates of coronavirus, we said there's got to be something more we can do. I called friends and I said, would you be willing to host a testing site on your parking lot? And Reverend Renee was one of those pastors who agreed to do it. And we are forever grateful for that, not just because she said yes, but because she brought everything, she brought everybody, well, she brought the whole church with her.
I had the honor of pastoring the church where I grew up. And one of the things I know about that congregation is that we did a very good job taking care of each other. How can we move from taking care of each other to taking care of our community? Mm. And Faith and for the Sake of All was the answer to my question. It was the resolve to my dilemma. And when I received the call, certainly within the pandemic, trying to think of what is most important at this moment in the lives of my people. What do they need? And it let me know that as much as preaching Jesus is needed, necessary, and there's no way around it, we had to be Jesus. We had to demonstrate that we would take care of the sick. You know, it looks different than the ancient text in this 21st century, but it was an opportunity for me to see the way to do it, the way to minister to this community so that we would be represented as known as a church that cares for the people of God. And the question as to whether or not we would do it, I felt like the Lord did not put us on that corner with that parking lot just to park a car. Amen. It was a place for ministry.
Yes.
And so that really gave me the opportunity. It was a teaching moment for me as pastor to show the church how to be the church. We were no longer inside, but it was an opportunity for us to go out and make ourselves known and reach out to the community. And we had the expertise from Reverend Gabrielle and her staff to come in, and Care STL come in and do it. And then we were able to launch off of that and partner with the St. Louis Diaper Bank and voter registration and other things that the people needed. So it was a great opportunity for us to even demonstrate Matthew 25, feeding the hungry, taking care of the sick, making sure that the people had what they needed in that moment. We didn't even have to mention Jesus's name, okay? Just the fact that we were being the people of God, and it has been such a tremendous blessing. And
it was clear that your church was a beacon. The church is not, I believe, individual locations. The church is the church, big C. And the more we can take advantage of that and leverage the fact that we are more than we appear to be, I think the more we will be able to impact the world. But there is something when you understand that the church is bigger than any one building, bigger than any one denomination, and it has inspired us to do some things. One of our biggest projects coming up is called the Community Chaplaincy Project.
Yeah, as we were doing this work of literally bringing healthcare to the community, on parking lots of churches, on street corners, we were finding that, as so many people have seen, COVID-19 didn't just bring physical health issues and disparities to the surface. It brought all kinds of other disparities to the surface, and mental health being a big one. We started having these conversations, what role can we play as a faith-based organization in looking at health from a holistic standpoint. Like we were able to bring physical health care through the testing. But we were also doing pastoral care and chaplaincy as we were walking with people literally to sit down and have that test done. There's a lot of fear and anxiety, right? And we started to realize, if you could access healthcare in a hospital system, you're automatically going to have access to a chaplain, right? If you're going through healthcare institutions, but we are trying to bring healthcare to communities that have historic distrust of healthcare institutions. So maybe we need to bring the chaplains outside of healthcare institutions and into the community. And maybe there are communities that feel super marginalized and have been super alienated by institutional healthcare and institutional religion, such as queer communities, that we may actually be able to care for more adequately by taking it out of the church. And so we started looking at how could we create a chaplaincy project, really recruiting people from the community. Some of them may be seminary trained and maybe ministry trained people. Some of them maybe not, but people who have a heart for the community. So we're providing a path for vocational creativity and resilience outside of traditional ministry settings for people to serve. And we're providing this training for folks. So we've created, through our networks of people, we've created 12 hours of training for these chaplains to provide LGBTQIA competence and ability to engage scripture around LGBT issues, to provide trauma-informed spiritual care that takes into account, all forms of trauma, including racialized oppression trauma and gender trauma and religious trauma, right? We're looking at it from all these different angles and really equipping people to literally be chaplains for the community. I'm really excited about this project.
Specific for us, what's important for Faith and for the Sake of All as we enter into this work is that we do that in a way that is as equitable as it can be. It's important to us not to just do something and say we can do it because it's easy, right? Sometimes we can do some things and they are pretty easy, but we can't stop there. We have to find the places and look to the edges, look to the margins and say, who's being left out in this process? And so this is not the easy work. This is the work that is difficult because it annoys people when you stop their momentum. When you say, oh, we got to make sure that it's not just the people who can go online and sign up on the internet. What about those people who don't have internet? What about those people who don't speak English? What about those people who are deaf and need a translator? All of those items allow us not to keep people out on the edges and say, and be proud of ourselves because we got something done, but we leave a whole bunch of people behind us. So these are the kind of processes that we're undergoing now. Through the church, we are helping to make sure that residents in Black communities are getting signed up for these vaccines, and we're in the process of doing it now. And so we are so grateful for this opportunity that we could share this information with you all today. We ask you to support us. Go to our website, www.faithandforthesakeofall.org, just the way it sounds. Thanks so much.
Tina says in her description of her own autobiography as someone growing up not churched, that the church saved her life. And she says at the end of that autobiography, something that I hope congregations hear, which is the church doesn't know its own power.
We don't know our capacity for change. And no, we don't know our own power. And I think that's true scripturally when we watch Jesus with the disciples and, they can't get it right and they can't, they can't cast out the demons and they say, how come we can't do that? And it's not that they can't, it's that they don't know their own power. And I think that's very true of the church. The church has immense power to heal and to change and to transform people's lives. But the church is institutionalized. And we live ourselves in theologies of scarcity. And if we don't live in theologies of scarcity, we do what's on the opposite end of that, which is just as bad,
Mm.
theologies of abundance.
Mm.
The church needs to root itself in theologies of sufficiency. And if everyone is sufficiently cared for, there are going to be some who have a little more, but everyone will have what they need.
Reverend Renee says, I have the honor of serving a church that was my home church, where I grew up. And we were really good at taking care of each other and not so good at taking care of the community. And that understanding of church, I think, has really been a powerful formation that congregations wrestle with in this shift.
Well, that reminds me of starting in Ferguson, right? I think what Renee names is true of most churches.
Yes.
That we're really good at taking care of ourselves. I think what's also true is we're not really aware of anything outside of ourselves. And Ferguson made us become aware.
Mm-hmm.
And becoming aware caused some people to be activated.
Mm-hmm.
And it's made a huge difference. It changed, this is not for them, but it changes, I think, often about the clergy who came together just to hang out.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were so different. We were all from all these different worlds. And we weren't, it was like there was no one thing that was in common. It was really crazy. Except that we all wanted to survive and not have to be out there by ourselves. That was the commonality, right? And I think we taught each other, Deb. It's amazing.
It is amazing. It is amazing. So the power. Reverend Renee talks about how, she does that thing about how the churches that she grew up in was good at taking care of themselves. And that she wanted to lead the church to be good at taking care of the community, but she could never find the vehicle to do that or the way to do that. And how Faith and for the Sake of All was the vehicle for that for her. Mm-hmm. And it's this thing she says about the church parking lot. She sees all of the medical testing and all of the supplies out in the parking lot during COVID. And she realizes this church parking lot used to be thought of as just for cars. And here it is, a medical operation.
I feel incredibly grateful to have attended Eden. And I've seen a lot of seminaries by now. Eden was the place for me. Eden helped me be who I am becoming without denigrating who I was. And I pray that that is what it does for every student. And I know that it has done it for quite a few. And I bring that up in this place because a challenge that we're going to face as a church is that we are training pastors, we're training ministers to serve in congregations that do not exist. And what I heard Renee also say was, thank you for helping me be able to live into what I know we could be. Right? And there are a lot of people that have a role to play in that. Because if she is a daughter of that church, something happened in her theological formation that made her uncomfortable in the water that she swam in. And then these connections that have happened, which all happen to be Eden connections. Imagine that. Helped her find a pathway to begin to pass through the congregation, she's prepared for it.
What do you think about this dynamic being good for churches? These connections of solidarity are, yes, about treating the people's needs as holy. How do you see it working that creates vitality in the congregation? I think, as you see Paul Brady sit up in his chair and say, we've been transformed. We're not just saying that we're a beacon for justice, we're doing it. There's an energy there about what it means to belong to the church that happens in this shift.
It makes the gospel come alive. And anytime you can make the gospel, even anytime you can take the stories of the gospel and lift them from the page and make them become alive, then the people are energized because they see how they can make a difference. And it happens because room is made, space is made for people to belong just as they are, right?
Right, and belong to something more than a congregation, belong to this story, belong to this movement, belong to this work of God.
Yes, in the ways they feel called to belong to that work, right? Because what else was very unique about this is that all of these people came at the work differently, and all of the work was accepted and respected. When you launch something, it leaves the structure.
When you launch something, it leaves the structure. Such powerful reflections from Reverend Tracy Blackman on such amazing conversations among community leaders and congregational leaders about these partnerships that are bringing vitality to congregations and moving the ministry of the church into communities. And so many learnings, so much richness. Thoroughly enjoyed everyone's amazing sharing in the forums on Facebook and here on Zoom in the chat. So thank you so much for all of your contributions. We are going to be wrapping up now as the hour is late with great gratitude and thanksgiving for our cooling camp lecturer, Reverend Tracy Blackman, and thanks for all of our congregational leaders and community partners for this amazing conversation and the opportunity today with our Brueggemann lecturer, Dr. Steve Patterson, to think so deeply about these themes, which I hope those of you who have been able to attend both sessions are seeing the connections. So let's continue to work on this church and progressive Christian movement. We move now into Thursday, and so there are upcoming sessions tomorrow at noon on global partnerships for solidarity, and encourage you to attend that. An amazing conversation hosted by Mary Schaller-Blaufus and Damayanti Niles with our international alumni, really showcasing their leadership in the global church. And tomorrow afternoon at 5:30, our wonderful colleague in contextual ed and community engagement, Reverend Dr. Dietra Wise-Baker, will be leading a public square theology conversation with Eden alumni who are engaged in different contexts of public square theology about the times we're in, entitled Good News versus InfoWars. So how does the progressive Christian movement take shape within public square contexts, and how is that being led out? We will conclude with worship on Friday, a powerful series of sessions and opportunities to gather around what it means to be the progressive Christian movement. Thanks so much for being with us. Have a great evening. Good night.